When my son invited me to a luxury villa for a family weekend, I thought it was finally a chance to reconcile. But the moment I saw the champagne glass placed in front of me, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a reunion. It was an attempt on my life, and the people behind it were my own son and his wife. The text message came at 2:07 p.m. A smiling selfie of my son and his new wife in front of a beachfront resort, captioned, "Dad, you have to see this. We've planned something special for you this weekend. Don't be late, we're flying you out tonight." I stared at the photo long enough that the pixels began to blur. Her teeth were too white for the expression in her eyes. The woman in the photo, Claire, had that practiced friendliness that makes you want to like her before you even meet. My chest tightened in a way I couldn't ignore. Something cold slid down my spine, the old instinct of a man who'd spent 40 years running a shipping company. If something sounded too easy, check it twice. But I wanted to believe it. For a long, stupid moment, I let myself feel my son Mark had missed me and wanted to fix what we'd broken. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the argument about the family trust and the loan he swore he'd pay back. I remembered his face the night he stormed out, the slam of the car door, the long, quiet after. I remembered promising myself I'd reach out when the time was right. This might be the moment, so I packed a small bag. I wore the sweater my wife had loved and set off to the airport, telling myself I was going because reconciliation is worth an effort. I told myself I was doing what any father should: show up. They met me at the private terminal with hugs that were just a breath too long. Mark looked thinner, polished. Claire's hand fit in mine like it had rehearsed warmth. The car they put me in smelled like lemon and new leather. They talked about the villa in soft, delighted voices as if I were not there, as if my presence were a trophy to display rather than a person to welcome. The drive up the cliff road took in the ocean like a movie. The villa sat on a saddle of rock, all glass and white stone, private and gleaming. "It's ours for the weekend," Claire said, eyes bright. "We wanted you to see what we're building." Mark gripped my shoulder. "Dad, we thought you deserved to see what we've been doing with the trust money." Her fingers lingered on my wrist in a way that felt strange. I smiled because that's what you do when your son is proud. I didn't yet know how hollow that pride would sound. Inside, they showed me the rooms. Each corner spoke of remodeling budgets and Instagram-ready perfection. There was a kitchen that would make a chef jealous, and a dining table the size of a conference room. "We'll have dinner soon," Claire said. "But we'd first walk the property," she insisted. The ocean wind peeled off the dust of the city, promising a perfect evening. The staff, who were polite, quiet people, left us alone, and as the sun slid down, I began to feel that old paternal peace returning. The first uneasy detail lodged in the back of my teeth like a bad taste. There were cameras tucked into corners, tiny black domes that watched the infinity pool, the guest hall, the kitchen. Mark laughed when I noticed them. "Security, Dad, you know how this area is." He raised his glass. "We wanted everything to be perfect for you." We ate on the terrace, starched linen, soft string music. Claire was the perfect hostess, attentive, laughing, smoothing the napkin on my lap. She was the one who insisted on a toast. "To family," she said, and Mark echoed it. The wine tasted of oak and money. I lifted my glass and smiled. I had no idea the glass in my hand was part of a plan. After dinner, they suggested a walk inside. I followed, feeling both flattered and oddly small. Claire led me toward a study at the back of the house. "You'll love his," she said. Mark set this up like a man cave/office. The room was perfect. Leather, maps, a safe built into the wall. Mark opened it and paused as if caught in a private pleasure. "We wanted to show you the future," he said, and there it was, an impressed admiration that made my stomach drop. They left me to freshen up while they took a phone call, and I wandered toward the pantry to get a glass of water. My hand brushed a shelf and knocked over a small amber bottle that clinked against the tile. The label was not a brand I recognized. It read sodium azide laboratory reagent, handle with care. The warning pictogram made my breath catch. I turned the bottle over in my hand, my training as a problem solver kicking in. Poison screamed at me from one line, toxic if ingested. My heart hammered. I replaced the bottle exactly where I'd found it and walked away as if nothing had happened. Adrenaline rendered everything in the moment. I moved slowly, like a man walking through glass. In the dining room, Claire carried a tray with 3 identical glasses of what looked like champagne. Her smile was luminous. "We saved the good bottle for you, Dad," she purred. "We just want one little toast." There was a plan in the way she set the glass at my right hand. It felt too deliberate. I had a flash of a story I'd heard on the radio years ago. A son or daughter plotting to harvest a fortune from a quiet old man. Then I heard the lemony voice of the maid telling a joke in the kitchen, and realized I was not imagining malice. The bottle in the pantry had been labeled wrongly on purpose, carefully hidden among cleaning supplies. My hands began to sweat. I did the only sensible thing that night. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. Then I called 911 with my phone hidden in my sleeve, and whispered the words no father should ever have to say. "I think my son is trying to kill me." The dispatcher asked for my location, for details, and I told the story as I had just lived it. The bottle, the toast, the glass placed at my right hand. The voice at the other end told me officers were on the way and to stay put. 19 minutes felt like an eternity. I sat on the closed toilet lid and breathed through it, fighting the urge to run. I wanted, without quite being able to say it at first, not to believe it could be true about Mark. Then another detail stabbed at me. The way Mark's eyes had glazed when he opened the safe. The way Claire had casually said they'd been using the trust for investments. Trust, money, possibility, motive. Through the bathroom vent, I could hear Mark and Claire speaking in the kitchen in low tones. The cadence was familiar, the quiet collage of people delivering lines. I listened to their voices until men in uniform arrived and shattered their script. When the door burst open and the officers stepped through, everything erupted and came into motion. I led them to the pantry and pointed. They recovered the bottle, photographed it, and aged it. They took statements. They looked at Mark with a kind of disbelief that turned solid into legal consequence. He stammered. Claire tried to compose herself, then failed, hands trembling. The officers asked the obvious questions, and the answers unspooled in public. "Why would my son do this?" I whispered, both pleading and accusing the universe. The short answer, the brutal answer, punched me. He wanted the trust money freed. If I were gone, the papers could be changed. His debts would be wiped away. His life rebuilt on my absence. That night, the house became a crime scene. The sea sighed outside as if nothing had happened. People whispered into phones, and detectives moved like surgeons, careful and precise. I thought of all the small paper trails I'd kept from decades of business. Bank transfers, notarized forms, the ledger in my office. A lawyer arrived before midnight. The cool professionalism reminding me that this would be decided not with a toast, but with documents. Depositions and courtrooms. In the hours after they took Mark and Claire away in cuffs, I sat at the terrace edge and watched the ocean swallow the horizon. I realized something I'd been avoiding. For years, I'd give over and over, because I loved my son, because I thought love meant fixing other people's mistakes. I'd seeded boundaries the way you hand out tools, intending to help and ending with nothing left to build with. That generosity had become a weapon used against me. When I finally slept, if you can call the fitful doze of a man who just survives, reviving amped on his life sleep, it was with a new resolution. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are surviving. The media came the next morning like a tide. A neighbor with a drone had captured the arrival, and an impatient story had already begun circulating. Beverly Hills scandal father nearly poisoned in family feud. Reporters left business cards under my door, and cameras blinked past my gate. Lawyers advised quiet. The officers told me not to talk to the press, but even quieter than the external storm was a much harder interior conflict. My son had been my boy. How could I reconcile the memory of teaching him how to change a tire with the man cuffed in the back of a patrol car? The forensics report came back in a day. Traces of sodium azide had been detected in the glass set aside for me, plus remnants in the blender that Claire had used to prepare non-alcoholic juice. Miserly on the surface but lethal in a teaspoon. Sodium azide can stop the heart in minutes. The lab results read like accusation after accusation. The prosecutor's office called it attempted homicide with the added motivation clause. Financial gain. My attorney, a stern woman named Avery Locke, moved like a chess player. We met over coffee and spreadsheets. "This is ugly," she said, eyes scanning a folder thick with bank statements I had taken an hour to assemble. "But your record is cleaner than clean. Documented transfers, deposits to their accounts, a regular pattern of assistance." She tapped a line on a page. "Notice the timing of education loans, house down payments, sudden debts coinciding with large transfers. It all read like a ledger of dependency baked into entitlement. We filed for emergency injunctions to freeze assets and to protect the trust. Without a signed loan agreement, there was no simple repayment case. But there were other avenues: unjust enrichment, elder financial abuse, and most urgently, evidentiary protections for my life. Meanwhile, Mark's social media clung to a different narrative. Claire had already posted a crying selfie that painted a very different picture. An elderly man, being unreasonable, abandoning his family. The court of public opinion loved a tragic story. It eats ambiguity for breakfast. For 2 days, the posts multiplied like wildfire, and strangers wrote me long messages about how hurt the family looked. I kept my responses measured because Avery told me the only thing worse than a bad jury is a jury with screenshots. We needed more than screens. We needed witnesses who would talk. I had one in the form of Larry, the same neighbor who'd first warned me that evening while trimming his hedge. Larry's testimony was that he'd seen another car pull up 2 months earlier. A man in a suit, a lawyer, he guessed, and an older gentleman carrying a leather bag had entered Mark and Claire's home. He'd later heard Claire's voice mention papers and arrangements. Later investigations found that Claire's father had died suddenly less than a week after that meeting, and that death, which the coroner had closed as natural causes, had never been subjected to the toxicology screens we would have insisted on had any of us known then to ask. The detective assigned to my case, Detective Morales, had eyes that missed nothing. She treated the family like a puzzle, and with each piece she found bank statements, transaction histories, social posts. The picture darkened. "This isn't just about one night," she said. "Patterns matter. You said you gave money, and gave until it stopped being a habit and started being a habit. That can enable people to rationalize desperate acts." Her words stun, but they also hold a truth I had to own. I had let my compassion balloon into absorption. I'd been the man who paid for everything out of love, and they had learned to expect it. The more I resisted that self-accusation, the more clearly it became the backbone of everything Claire and Mark had attempted. Court hearings came like weather, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. The judge at the interim hearing read a summary and ordered temporary conservatorship over a portion of the trust assets to prevent further dissipation. The prosecutor filed attempted murder charges. The police reopened Claire's father's death for a retrospective toxicology screen. The results were damning. Traces of a similar toxin were found in his liver tissue, reclassified as suspicious. The chain of events snapped into focus, but the human cost remained. My phone vibrated with voicemails from friends and colleagues who had once admired our family's charm and had no idea a storm brewed beneath. Some called to express sorrow, others to whisper doubts about my role in enabling this. It was a strange shard. People were both sympathetic and judgmental. I appeared in a few interviews, my words careful and spare. The press wanted tears. I gave them facts. It felt cold and right. The prosecution moved slowly but inexorably. Claire's past surfaced in small ways. An inheritance her father left, then redirected into holdings she controlled. A fidelity to a lifestyle that suggested spending beyond Mark's legal income. Mark's credit history showed emergency cash-outs and unexplained transfers to offshore accounts. Motive began to stand up like a defendant. He stood. The law can be almost poetic when evidence aligns. Intent, opportunity, benefit. At night I would wake from half-sleep, the house around me unfamiliar. I would recall small scenes from those years. Mark at 6 refusing to eat broccoli, then making a solemn pact with me that he would always tell the truth. I replayed these memories not to punish myself, but to find the late point where someone changed, where choices tip into darker things. The hardest truth I had to face was not only the fact that my son had acted monstrously, but that my own refusal to set boundaries had been a contributing factor. Friends rallied. One by one, people visited with casseroles and quiet words. Some brought receipts, old letters Mark had written as a boy that made me ache. One friend, Maria, Mark's godmother, brought me a shoebox full of photographs of birthdays, of fishing trips, of a simpler time. We sat at the kitchen table and cried without sound. Grief has a different grammar than anger. The court date for arraignment arrived, and the packed courtroom felt like a theater. Reporters craned cameras. I sat on the plaintiff's side and watched my son shuffle forward, a shell of the boy who once tried to sell lemonade on our street. He stared at me and said nothing. Claire's face remained unreadable. The prosecutor laid out the charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, and a laundry list of fraud-related allegations. The defense pleaded not guilty. Their strategy seemed to be to attack my credibility, paint the generous father as eccentric and emotionally volatile. It's a familiar defense when reputation is your Achilles heel. If you can make the complainant look unwell, doubt seeps in like fog. But our documentation, those neat columns of numbers that had, for years, been the only language I truly trusted, would not be denied. Avery pressed forward with patient intensity. Between hearings, I walked the shoreline near my apartment. The ocean has a way of flattening emotions into manageable lines. There was peace in the cadence of the waves, if not in my heart. I rehearsed testimony in my head and assembled the files I'd grown to rely on. Bank scans, signed notes, email threads I'd forgotten existed. I realized I felt more like an investigator than a victim, more concerned with a ledger than with the man who had once called me Dad. The trial window loomed. Evidence would be examined under harsh lights. Loyalties would be tested. I dreaded the legal theater, but secretly felt a grim relief that the truth would be weighed in measured terms. I had always been an engineer of facts. Now my life would be judged on proof rather than pity. The courtroom was hotter than I expected. Cameras were banned, but the press found ways to stand outside and paint headlines that made my stomach drop. The opening statements were clinical. The prosecutor spoke about method and motive, about the careful, almost cruel steps of a planned murder. The defense countered with personal testimonials about family complexity, and presented me as a man prone to misremembering a common tactic against elderly plaintiffs. My hands shook the first time I took the stand, but the truth has a way of giving steadiness to a voice. I recounted the night in detail, because detail is honesty's ally. I told the jurors about the small amber bottle hidden behind soapy bottles, about the glass placed with casual certainty, about the way Claire hummed my late wife's favorite lullaby while she doctored the wine. I told them about the phone call in the bathroom, the officers arriving like thunder, and the evidence bags wrapped with plastic. Each fact sounded less like a memory and more like an accounting entry, concrete, immovable. Cross-examination tried to erode my story with insinuations about memory and bias. "You loved your son," defense counsel intoned, "which makes you angry and vengeful when you see him fail." I answered simply, "I loved him. I still do." Loving someone doesn't mean letting them kill you. The courtroom shifted in a small, collective intake of breath. Maybe it was the truth. Indeed, we brought in forensics to testify. The technician explained how sodium azide behaves in the body and its rapid effects when introduced to oxygenated systems. They testified about the lab matching samples from the glass to the bottle in the kitchen. The prosecutor then displayed transactions: thousands wired for tutoring, payment for consulting, and luxuries paid directly from my accounts. Pattern, pattern, pattern. The defense called witnesses who tried to show Mark as a person under stress, a man pushed into bad choices by circumstance. They painted Claire as a woman devoted to family. But then the investigator called a witness, the man who had been the estate lawyer for Claire's father. He had drafted wills and transfers months before the elder man's sudden death. Emails surfaced showing Claire's insistence that certain accounts be moved into a trust accessible to her. Wasn't proof of murder, the lawyer said carefully, but it composed a tight, unsettling frame. The jury retired for deliberations. Waiting is a vexing thing. It stretches like wire. I replayed the trial in my head and tried to find any loose ends the defense might exploit. It was a strange, almost puerile thing to hope for. I wanted justice, but I dreaded what it meant for the boy who once carried my fishing rod. They came back after what felt like an eternity. The foreman stood. We all rose. The word guilty hit like an impact. Mark's shoulders sagged. Claire didn't move. They were led away. The relief that washed over me felt complicated. A balm like hot tea when you have a fever. It healed something but left heat in its wake. Sentencing followed months later. Life in prison for both. Not because I wanted pure vengeance, but because the court found the cruelty too extreme, the premeditation too clear. The judge read the sentence from a paper with steady hands. I had thought of many things to say in the courtroom that day, but when I finally rose, it was with a different voice. "You were my son," I told Mark quietly. "You chose darkness. I wish you had chosen help instead." He did not look at me. After the trial, there are bureaucracies to navigate and voids to fill. There were civil suits to recover funds, and an ethical cleanup for Claire's separate financial misdeeds. I donated a portion of the recovered estate to support toxicology testing and elder safety initiatives. It felt like a small, sensible thing to do. Transform money that had been the motive of a crime into a safeguard against future ones. Friends came in waves, bringing casseroles and visiting, bringing with them the slow mending of human ties. I built a scholarship fund in my wife's name, focusing on familial ethics and trust law. The irony was hard but warming, turning money abused into education that might protect others. I learned how to talk without accusation and how to say no without shame. The cost was high, but learning to protect yourself is not the same as becoming hard-hearted. I get bankrupt. Some are from people who say the story saved them from a relationship that was quietly bankrupting their spirit. Others are from people who say the opposite, that they miss a son and cannot reconcile the human with the monstrous. To them I write back honest and short. Love and boundaries are not opposites. They are companions. You do not protect love by letting it devour you. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the terrace of my modest house and listen to the ocean I once watched from someone else's cliffside vantage. The waves do not judge. They offer a rhythm that helped me rebuild my life. I volunteer now at a community center, teaching elders how to spot financial abuse. I have made new friends. I have learned to accept that generosity must be married to wisdom. One afternoon, months after the verdict, a letter arrived from Mark. It was short. "Dad," it read, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I am sorry. I am trying to be better." The paper trembled in my hands as if it had a pulse. I thought about the little boy who learned to tie his shoes at my kitchen table, about the nights we sat up late talking about ships and navigation, and about the man he had become. I answered because that is what one does when someone tries to come back from ruin. "I forgive you. I see consistent change. Show me that you can build an honest life and reclaim your name by working, not taking what is not yours." Some might call my response cold. Others might say it's merciful. It was simply careful. Forgiveness is for the giver. It should not mean giving away the keys to your future. If there is a lesson in all this, and I have been trying to shape one like a craftsman, it's this. Kindness without limits can be a trap. Protect your heart and your assets with the same care. Teach your children generosity, yes, but teach them responsibility as well. Love should be the structure that supports life, not a ladder others climb to reach a better view. If this story matters to you, if you recognize someone in it, do one practical thing today. Check on your older loved ones' accounts. Ask questions about sudden transfers and keep good records. You might be saving a life that way. Thank you for listening. If you want more stories like this of wrongs righted, boundaries learned, and justice pursued, subscribe and stay. Share your thoughts below. Life is fragile and complicated. Telling our stories is how we learn to be wiser.